Dr. Pachauri has let it be known that we want to involve you in the conversation a little bit, so I don't know if it's possible, but if we can bring up the house lights just a little bit so that Dr. Pachauri and I can see the audience, that'd be great. But I'd like to throw out a first question to you based on the very last things you talked about. If you're thinking about, and I realize you're not making decisions for the IPCC, you're merely putting out an agenda, but if you're thinking about expanding to social consequences, does that mean that you're going to have to mobilize an army of additional scientists in areas like anthropology, political science, communication, the dismal science, economy, sociologists, and so on? And that would take you quite a bit beyond, I think, where the IPCC has been for the past 20 years.
Well, I think that's an issue to consider, because whether we get a larger number of contributing authors who provide us with specific inputs on these issues, or larger team of authors altogether for each of the working group reports, is certainly a question that we'll have to raise. But related to this is another problem that I think we'll have to come to grips with. You know, if you look at the amount of literature that's being produced on various aspects of climate change, there's been an almost exponential rate of growth. And while, 10 or 15 years ago, the authors of our reports had to deal with a relatively small number of publications, today there's such an explosion. And I think within this time frame of 5 to 6 years, they would have a huge amount to do. So, that's another issue that we need to consider in relation to expanded subject coverage. And I think the IPCC will have to find a way of doing it. But this is an issue that I think we'll have to bring to bear on the selection of the authors that we have for the 5th assessment report. And I think the next Bureau will have to come to grips with some of these issues early on.
You said you had been listening to part of the discussion we had earlier. I don't know whether you heard this particular part that I'm going to refer to now. One of the panelists, and forgive me for forgetting who it was that mentioned it, raised the possibility that the IPCC might consider changing its mandate to become more policy prescriptive rather than being defined as being non-policy prescriptive. What's your view on that?
Well, my own personal view would be that we should not become policy prescriptive, but of course we should have a debate, because let's face it, the credibility of the IPCC has essentially been earned and established because we've not been policy prescriptive. And I think the moment you get into the arena of prescribing policies, then you're open to accusations of being political. I mean, that happens even today. But if we were to become policy prescriptive, there would be a legitimate reason for perhaps making that allegation. So I think the policy neutrality of the IPCC, but its policy relevance, has served us extremely well. I would feel comfortable maintaining that kind of personality.
It's your turn. If you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and I think we have some roving microphones that can come and reach you, and you shouldn't start speaking until you receive a microphone, because no one else will be able to see it. Oh, yes, sir, right back here. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Pachauri.
Do you want our questioners to identify themselves? Would you kindly identify yourself, or what organization you're with, perhaps?
Ismail Al-Jazuli, Sudan, and Bureau member. My question to Pachauri in IPCC future work. I think if we want to fulfill Article 2, we have to work in regional and sub-regional. This is one of the most pressing areas. I think you didn't say that in your priority areas. Because if we want to fulfill that for vulnerability, we have to work in more details at sub-regional level. Thank you.
Did you want to comment on that? Or?
Yeah, I would agree that, vulnerability and what might be dangerous is something very location specific. What may be dangerous in some part of the world, if you can come to a definition of dangerous, would be very, very location specific. I'm not too sure whether one can generalize that. I imagine that's the sense of what you were saying, and I would agree with that.
Okay, we'll go right down in front here. Just wait for the microphone. Just 1 second, please.
Yeah, my question is go to your very beginning of your presentation.
Would you mind identifying yourself, please?
I come from China, China Meteorological Administration, National Climate Center, I'm Ding Yihui, Okay, my question is back to your the very beginning of your presentation, So you are talking about the next assessment report, the new finding, Now, in such short time period, 5 years, so it's possible to update the new knowledge of climate change, The 5 years is enough, because we have already 4 assessment, summarize all the previous achievements, How about your confidence for the updating the knowledge?
Are you basically asking whether it would be better to take longer time than 5 years?
That's my question.
Okay.
That's the implication.
Well, there are 2 reasons why I would say that perhaps the 5 or 6 year time frame is fine. Firstly, in some areas, you certainly will get new knowledge. And the second reason why I would say that this time frame is good and serves the global community well is because, people tend to forget what was there earlier on. And if you come out with something that may even be, in some sense, a repeat of what was there in the previous report, it just goes home and it does make an impact. So I think in terms of the IPCC being able to provide information and scientific assessments, perhaps, as the panel has rightly decided, the 5 or 6 year time frame is a good one. May I, while I have the mic, request the translators to bear with us just a little more. I know we're eating into your time. I hope you would allow us to continue just a few more minutes. Thank you.
Dr. Pachauri, the reports that have come out in the past have been spaced in a certain way. Is it your feeling that any of those reports were repetitive or could have been done away with because there really wasn't very much new in them? My sense from reading them is that there was pretty dramatic news in all the reports, but is it possible that you could say, well, we'll go 10 years?
No, I would say each of the reports has had a very distinct upgradation or increase in the knowledge that was there in the previous one. And that's essentially based on the work that's being done globally. There's now much more research on climate change than was the case 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, I salute my predecessors who had much less to make use of in coming up with assessments that have been pretty comprehensive and complete. And I think each report has had something new, which clearly has been picked up by the policymakers and certainly the media and others.
Okay, we're going to go way in the back there. Yes, sir, just wait for a mic, please, and please identify yourself.
Yes, I'm Richard Newfarmer with the World Bank, Special Representative of the WTO and the UN system. Having watched the World Trade Organization conduct the most recent round of trade negotiations, I'm acutely aware of how difficult arriving at a multilateral agreement really is. And I wondered, given the fact that the World Bank in particular is going to ramp up its discussion or its analysis of policy issues, economic issues, issues of mitigation and so forth associated with global warming, I wonder if there were 3 or 4 topics that were, from your vantage point, looking forward to the negotiations, were particularly important from the standpoint of analysis that could inform policymakers and politicians as they sit down to begin to negotiate the next multilateral treaty.
Are you suggesting these are the kinds of activities an organization like the World Bank could undertake as a separate task?
The IPC might undertake, or that the international community, perhaps working in partnership, the World Bank with the IPC. I'm interested in the critical issues that policymakers are going to be concerned about looking forward.
Okay.
Well, I would say that the IPCC's assessments, being comprehensive, do provide a lot of information that policymakers can pick up. But having said so, I think we certainly need to keep up a continuous dialogue with the policy community by which we know what would be relevant and what would not be relevant. I'm not too sure whether one can identify 3 or 4 topics that might, in some sense, present the silver bullet that people are looking for. This is also something that keeps changing from time to time. But in general, I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, the socio-economic aspects, the economic aspects in particular, are going to be of critical importance. And vulnerability. I mean, if we clearly show the impacts of inaction versus the attractiveness of action, then, you know, I think that would provide a very compelling case for policymakers to move on.
Would you welcome contributions along those lines in terms of reporting by organizations such as the World Bank or the European Union or perhaps a number of other organizations, or would you see that as an infringement or an impingement upon what the IPCC is supposed to be doing? I'm thinking in terms of the social areas which you spoke about earlier.
What one would like is that, you know, once the IPCC completes a report, one would like to see organizations act as partners or carriers of our message and then reinterpret it and provide an aspect which perhaps may not come out directly from the reports, but which may be of relevance to the policy community, and which organizations like the World Bank may have some strengths in being able to reinterpret. So I think that kind of role for the World Bank or other such organizations is certainly welcome to us.
Let's go back here in the middle. Yes. I see you. Thanks.
Thank you. Adrian Fernandez from Mexico, the National Environment Institute. Dr. Pachauri, I think that the 4th assessment report was produced in a perfect timing. In fact, it was intentionally produced right before the Bali conference, and in a way was very successful because finished with most of the debate about the basic science. Now, what I believe is that the IPCC doesn't have, at the moment, the tools or the practices or the way to work in an active way within the next 15 months to help the negotiating process. If we just look at the portfolio we have at the moment, it seems like the IPCC is very good at the reviews every certain number of years with a lot of rigor, and that's fantastic. But maybe within the next few days, we have to think about how can the IPCC can actively, not passively, but actively support the very complicated next few months of negotiations. Thank you.
You're basically looking for some output from the IPCC before Copenhagen. No?
You know, I think there is enough in the 4th assessment report that could be of extreme value to the negotiations that are continuing. What happens is often people forget what's in the report. And I think we have to find a means, and this is an important part of what we can do by way of outreach. We have to find a means by which we can reinforce the messages, or at least communicate the messages that are already there in the 4th assessment report. And this is really an issue of outreach that we need to come to grips with.
Okay, let's come down front here, please, if you would. We have a mic here. Okay. Lots of questions. We'll try to get as many of you as we can.
Monsieur le Président, je m'exprime en français. Alors,
just a moment. I'm sorry. We need to wait for the interpretation. Go ahead.
Je commence tout d'abord par féliciter Monsieur le Président du GIEC pour tout leur travail, notamment pour le 4e rapport du GIEC qui a permis à Bali d'aboutir à une feuille de route et qui nous éclaire pour l'avenir. Ma question est la suivante, elle a été déjà posée, mais je la formule autrement sur les impacts du point de vue régional. Alors là, je commence d'abord par me présenter. Je suis M. Mostefa Kara de l'Algérie. Je suis membre du GIEC qui a assisté à la création du GIEC en octobre 1988 à Genève, ici, et qui faisait partie du groupe 2. justement principal, et c'est comme ça qu'on a abordé l'aspect de vulnérabilité, car l'Afrique a été le continent le plus touché par les changements climatiques, car mon pays a été le premier pays à être touché par la sécheresse soudano-sahélienne des années 70, qui s'est traduite par 320 000 morts. Tout le bétail a été décimé et les premiers réfugiés climatiques ont été chez nous, en Algérie, à Tamanrasset. Nous avons tous reçu 40 000 réfugiés, de sorte qu'on a été confronté à un problème humain et social considérable.
Okay, can I ask you to come to a conclusion, please?
Yes, okay. Et uniquement, je cite cet exemple pour dire que l'Afrique, comme l'a dit dernièrement le président du Ghana, à l'occasion de la dernière conférence, que c'est le continent qui est ignoré dans les changements climatiques, dans les impacts, et également c'est le continent qui est le plus menacé, c'est lui qui est touché le plus par les impacts négatifs.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop there. I'm going to ask you to stop there, please. Sir, I'm going to ask you to stop. Do you want to respond to what he's talked about so far?
Well, all I would say is that, of course, we need a lot more research. We need much better assessment of impacts in different parts of the world, including Africa, certainly.
Okay. And back here, there was a question. Yes. Go ahead, sir. Please identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Abdallah Muksit. I am Deputy Director of National Meteorological Service. And I'm just going to talk about 2 points. I think the level of the work done by IPCC is a good one at the level of Nobel Prize. But my understanding in the coming years, the structure of the 5th report should focus on socio-economic, regional impact, and also some discussion between food security and some alternatives. And all these aspects should need more precise and qualified data, because when you go to local, regional, and socioeconomic, the kind of data needed are a little bit different from those general who helped in the IPCC process. For example, running global model needs some global data. This is not problematic. But when you go through local models, regional model, and socioeconomic studies, you need local data with good quality. With this will rise the problem of developing country, especially in Africa. What is the strategy for the future work of IPCC to initiate a good gathering of data at first, and to mobilize those people to do a good job?
All right, we got the question twice. I think you answered some of it in your comments earlier when you talked about what to do with the Nobel Prize money, but if maybe you want to make another comment on this.
Well, I think the point is well taken, and I hope when the next bureau, whoever it consists of, decides to move ahead with the 5th assessment report, they keep these aspects in mind.
And that has to do with your budget suggestions as well, of course. All right. Let's see, where are we going to go here? All the way in the back? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mike Kaufman, Secretary of the Campaign for a Hydrogen Economy, based in Manchester, where all our carbon troubles began, sorry everybody, but with contacts all over the world. I wonder if the IPCC has been surreptitiously influenced by the very interests, the political interests, which it says it wants to be distinct from. The evidence being that the figures mentioned for feasible carbon dioxide concentrations, whether raw carbon dioxide or equivalent carbon dioxide, are 450 or 550 parts per million. Both concentrations allowing the fossil fuel industries to continue. at the same time that all people who know enough about the carbon cycle know that the correct, if there is such a word for the Earth, the correct concentration should be the 280, which nature gave us until 200 years ago. Shouldn't, in fact, the IPCC work in its next report, especially on the renewable energy report, on the possibilities, the technical possibilities of reducing carbon dioxide concentrations to the level which we need, 280, or maybe even a little bit below, to compensate for the excess which is already there.
All right,
preferably, of course,
much.
by using hydrogen. Thank you.
You want to take that?
Well, all I can say is I assure you the IPCC is not an influenceable organization. We work transparently, we work in a manner that's objective and based purely on the merits of whatever we find by way of information or knowledge. We certainly can't be accused of being influenced by anyone.
Okay, we've had a long day. You've had a long day of listening and thinking. I'll take one more question, and then we'll call it a day and start partying. It's the last question. Your question is the last question between everybody here and the party.
It's not even a question. It's a comment on the ideas around about further input.
Would you identify yourself, please?
Certainly, Michael Zamit Kutaya from Malta. A number of ideas about input to the negotiations before Copenhagen. We have exactly 15 months to Copenhagen, and the last thing we want is an excuse to the negotiators to hold back and wait for some further news from IPCC. Let's bear that in mind. We have a very good basis for negotiation in the fourth assessment report. By all means, it needs to be better communicated or further communicated, but let's not give a pretext to wait and see. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Pachauri, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, those are wise words, and I recall some such discussion took place in Bali, and my response was, we know enough to move on and take action. There's no need to look for any new knowledge.
Okay, Dr. Rajendra Pachauri, the chair of the IPCC, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone here for your comments this afternoon, and I want to thank our audience as well for outstanding participation throughout the afternoon. Renata, do you have other announcements to make before we release everyone to the... Yes, okay, hold on just one moment for some more instructions. Dr. Christ.
Well, the only announcement I have after thanking Ralf Begleiter for leading us through this afternoon and the presenters from the earlier agenda items, you are now invited to a reception offered by the Swiss Confederation, Ville and Canton de Genève, and it's going to take place outside in front of this hall in the foyer. And we will announce maybe a few additional, more informal agenda items later on. But please first go and enjoy the reception, enjoy the drinks and food. Thank you very much.